Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how I created this service slider on CodePen with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now to start us off, I've created the HTML, CSS and JavaScript documents just with some basic styles with the font and colours and link these all together. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is create a div to hold the slider text. So I'm going to have a holder, I'm going to have some start text. So for ours, I've used we excel at, and then we're going to want to have a slider value, which will contain, in our case, web development, plugin development, that sort of thing, but you can put anything you like in there. So I'm just going to put in here we excel at, and for now I will put in web development. So this is currently what we get. So I'm just going to add some styles to this so it displays a bit nicer. So we'll have flex on the holder and give it a gap of 15 pixels and we'll just bump the font size up a bit. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the JavaScript. So I'm just going to create a reference to the holder with query selector and just put in there holder and also the slider value. Cool. So the main sort of basis of this animation is going to use the set interval, and we'll have a function called slide which will run every 5 seconds, and we will define that here. Perfect. So in the CodePen, I used these sort of web development services as our content, so I'm just going to copy that over, but you can use anything you like in here. So the next thing we want to do is to get this slider content into our div. So I'm just going to create a slider counter which will keep track of the index of the slider content that's being displayed. So in my slide function, I will just set the inner HTML to be the slider content at the slider counter index. So now every 5 seconds, I'll just change that to 1 second for our sort of demo. The function will run, and we're just going to want to increment the slider counter every time this runs. I'm just going to fix that typo there. So now, as you can see, we're iterating over each of the slider content. However, we do get to a point where the slider counter is greater than the content. So we're just going to have a little check here that the slider counter is greater than or equal to the length of our content array. And if it is, we're just going to set the slider counter to be 0 so that it's reset. So if this runs now, once we get to CRM integrations, this should jump straight back to web development. Perfect. So now we can start on the sort of animation of these letters. So to do that, I'm just going to break up this. So instead of just directly putting the inner HTML value in there, we're going to loop through each letter and apply that to the value in its own div. Now, this just means we can have more control on the animation and style of each individual letter. So we're going to loop through each letter index in the slider content, and we're going to create a letter div for each one of these letters. And we're going to add a class to this, which we'll call letter, and we will set the inner HTML to be the current slider content at the current slider counter index with the specific letter index. And now we're going to want to add this with append child to our slider value. And now, as you can see, it's adding each of these letters in an individual div. We are going to want to, before this runs, just to clear out the previous word that we've used, like that. And now we can also go ahead and remove our placeholder. So now we're going to want to add some styles to make this inline instead of it displaying vertically. So for each slider value letter, in the slider value, we will set the display to be flex, and now that's displaying inline. Now I'm just going to add in another fix here, so that if the letter, we will define that up here, so the actual letter is that, and if the letter is just a blank space, we're going to want to change this to be a non-breaking space, just so that spaces are actually shown between the words that we have, and we can change that there. Perfect. So now we can get into the animations for each letter. So we're going to want the letters to start with the opacity of 0, and they're going to be translated to be bumped down a little bit. And now we can add the keyframes for each letter. So they're going to start at this same value, and they will end with full opacity, and they won't be translated. So now, as we can see, there's nothing actually shown, because we need to add this animation to each letter. And we're going to use the forwards property on this animation, so that once the animation has got this 100% value, it keeps that instead of going back to the 0 opacity and it not being visible. So now in the JavaScript for each letter div, we're going to want to add the animation class to this. And we're also going to want to add in the animation delay, so that, like on the codepen, each letter animates in slightly later than the other. And now we can set the interval to 5 seconds so we can view the full animation. And I'm just going to change this to be a bit quicker. There we go. So I'm also going to add in some styles to this slider value. So as you can see, for each word, the size of the holder is changing. So this slider value will set a minimum width at 400 pixels. So now this should stay exactly where it is. Now you might have noticed that it's taking a couple of seconds for the animation to actually show, and that's because this function here is only called after the 5 seconds has passed. So we're also going to want to call this function initially when the page loads. So if we refresh, the animation has started. Now the only thing we've got left to do is the holder animation for the slider value. So we call this the holder animation. Now we're going to want it to start with opacity of 1, and then at 90% we'll have opacity 1, and then at 100% we want to fade it out so that the last 5% of this holder animation is the whole holder just fading out. So we can then add that to the slider value once it has the animation class added to it. And we're going to want the duration of this animation for the holder to be the same length of time as the interval in JavaScript, so 5 seconds. And we will also set this to be forwards. Now in the JavaScript we can add in the class for the animation, and we're also going to want to remove it for the previous run so it re-triggers the animation. Now there is a bit of a glitch with adding classes to divs with JavaScript where it won't re-trigger. So I found that this line of code here will force that animation to re-trigger. Now, as you can see, once the text animation has finished, it will then nicely fade out. And the last finishing touch I'm going to add is I'm just going to set a color to each one of these letters. And that leaves us with this nice services slider animation, which should look great anywhere on your website, and you can change the content to be more specific to your website. And you can also have a play around with the animation. So maybe you want it to rotate in and then rotate out, or you want it to come in from the bottom and leave at the top. And you can do all of that within this letter keyframes. So I hope this has been beneficial to you. And if you want more tutorials like this, please let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching.